Three things that I'm going to be doing. Firstly, and I'm going to do this pretty briefly, I just wanted to kick off by giving you a few good reasons why ministries should grow. Okay, so I just wanted to go through that just as a general introduction to why things may want to grow beyond the local situation. Then secondly, what I want to do, and this is going to be the main part really, I just wanted to share a few sort of principles, if you like, that I suppose I've grown to believe over the last 20 years or so. And they help me as I try and shape the decisions that I have to make. So I thought I'd share those with you, and we'd have an opportunity just to sort of bat those around a little bit and see what you thought about those. So I think that's going to be the core of what we're going to be doing. And then finally, what I've got at the end is I've got a sort of group exercise just to look at some of the core things that are needed in any operation as it grows. And I thought we might try and sort of take a look at those and try and prioritise sort of what's the most important thing. So hopefully we'll have time to do all of that. So hello there. That's what we're going to be doing. Let's move on from there. So why should a ministry grow beyond the local situation? Well, first thing I thought of is others want it. So this is the situation where people see what you're doing at a local level and they say, we need what you've got. Okay? So first, fairly obvious reason why you may want to grow or may think about it. Secondly, personal conviction or a passion. So this is where somebody would say, well, this really must happen. You know, this is really important. I've got a real burden for this. Or may well be, the more charismatic you are, God told me to do this. So that's the second significant reason why ministries would grow. Thirdly, you may have had experience of similar models. So, this works in the States, surely it'll work in Europe. Maybe this works in Europe, surely it'll work in the States. It tends to be the other way around, but, if this works in the United Kingdom, will it work in mainland Europe? But experience of similar models may push you into expanding further. Fourth one, you may spot a gap, a ministry gap. You may see something. There's an urgent need which no one's filling. I mean, there's a lady on our leadership track who she does a pregnancy crisis thing in Serbia who spoke last year at the forum, and that seems to me a classic case of where somebody sees an urgent need. And there's probably a few other things in there as well. Actually, there's personal conviction and so on. But you may just spot this gap that nobody's filling. If you're looking at the outlines, this one wasn't actually on the outlines. It's just something that's come to me in the last few weeks, and that is financial reasons. I say these are good reasons to expand. I might put a little question mark on that one, because they may be good financial reasons, they may not be the best reasons. But situations that I could think of, it may be you're in a situation where you've got a very large overhead to cover. So what you're doing is good, but you can't make ends meet, so you actually try and find other avenues to meet that overhead. Or you may actually see a financial opportunity in one area which you could then use to fund another ministry which is struggling to raise funds. So there may be very good financial reasons why you may want to grow your ministry. There may be not so good financial reasons, but certainly that's a possibility. And then the last one, just natural evolution. It just happens. You just find yourself walking into to a situation where that happens. So those were the main reasons that I could think of. If you look in the commercial world and you say, why would commercial businesses expand? Actually, the list wouldn't look a lot different. That's quite interesting. People think it was all about money. Well, no, it's not all about money. All of those things would be present for why a commercial business may expand. The one big difference, though, I think, is that reason E, financial reasons, would be, it's not the only, but may well be the primary reason. It's generally the driving factor in the commercial world. people are actually, they're interested in all sorts of things. Money is certainly one of the major things. So what you would have is E, I would imagine, being very much higher in the commercial world, but actually the reasons are very, very similar. So we'll probably talk a little bit more about that as we move on. So I've got, I think it's 9 principles that I've thought of as I prepared this talk. I'll do 3 or 4 of them, and then we'll stop and feedback, and then do another. So we'll go on like that. So the first one is that I believe that the parachurch organisations exist to serve the local church. There are others who are far more qualified to do a Bible study on this than me, and many of you in the room would do a better Bible study than me on this. But I'd say that my understanding is that the thrust of the New Testament is that the authority is rooted in the local church. And what the parachurch does is it fills in the gaps. Okay? So the commercial parallel I can think of in this is almost like the central services. So if you imagine a sort of national or multinational company with local outlets, that you always got a central services there which fills in the gaps. I would say that there's lots of ways of looking at this, but particularly if the local church is weak, then there's some very big gaps to fill that the local church isn't doing. So I can see that if you're in a country where the local church is really, really small, the need for a parachurch movement is that much greater. But then you may have even bigger problems in terms of where, who's calling the shots on it. So I would say that our attitude, I'm involved in a parachurch ministry. My attitude has always got to be, how can I help you? Okay, that's how can we serve you, not how can you help us. And if you look at a lot of communications from parachurch organisations, there's a very narrow dividing line when they're saying, thank you for supporting us in our ministry. And I always look at that and I think, okay, what's the underlying attitude there? And the bigger the parachurch organisation, the more, that service lordship divide, there can be some confusions there. So I think that's a very interesting area, that one there. The second thing I'd say is that I would always want anybody who's employed by my organisation to be really rooted in a local church. What we actually try and do in some circumstances is have people who are primarily employed by the local church, and we just have them for a day or 2 a week. That provides different complications because you've got dual responsibilities there, but there are opportunities of synergies if you have that. But at the very least, I'd want all my employees to be rooted in that local church. So they keep their feet on the ground, and there's obviously accountability, all those other sort of things that get built in there. So there you go. That's one interesting area we may want to talk about a little bit more. Second one is that the key role, I believe, for me as a leader of a parachurch organisation, of any Christian organisation or church, is I need to discern God's strategy. That's my primary role. I've got a verse there, Proverbs 16 verse 9. If you've got the outline, I've quoted Proverbs 16 verse 3 there as well. There's an interesting juggling act that goes on between those two. But you could look at all sorts of verses and come up with examples. So, to say, well, I've got to discern God's strategy sounds fairly straightforward. Now, obviously, the reality is very, very different. It's always messy. What is God saying in this situation? And what happens if I think one thing and everybody else in the organisation thinks something else? And many times for me, I don't know about you, but for me, I'm just pushing on the door and seeing whether it opens. But even then, sometimes the door opens and you've still got to decide whether that's the right door to go through. And you can look at a few biblical examples of that as well. I think you'd pull in Acts just for one. So, not as clear-cut as it sounds, but there's 2 or 3 things I think to pick up from this. Firstly, knowing that God cares about my ministry more than I do, I find incredibly liberating. Because firstly, it means he's in ultimate control, whatever it may look like at the time. Secondly, when we seem to be in a mess, then there's always a way forward. And thirdly, I really don't need to have all the answers. Yeah? I don't need to be a genius. I just have to be faithful. I have to be prepared to listen as much as think. So to me, that's absolutely fundamental, discerning God's strategy, rather than making it up myself. Third thing I want to share with you is I think we need to respect business models, but we don't need to worship them. We certainly shouldn't be worshipping them. I spent 15 years, as I said, in the commercial world, and there's no doubt in my mind that I learnt things there that I would never ever have learnt anywhere else. So I really value the time that I spent in the commercial world, and I enjoyed myself there as well, and I met lots of good friends there. So I'm very thankful for that. I'm all in favour of looking at best practices, and I do believe that the Christian world can be far, far too introspective. I think it's really important to look at commercial models. But the God of the commercial world is primarily financial gain, primarily. So we never, ever should take commercial ideas, put them into our Christian ministries, and just assume that all's okay. You can look at, there are some areas actually where it's almost impossible to reciprocate. So, for example, the multinational world in the commercial world with holding companies and so on. You can't. Well, I've yet to find a way in which it can be done in the Christian world, because for Christianity Explored, if I want a US charity, I've got to set it up as a charity with independent trustees. So the opportunity of our UK bit owning the American one, I haven't found a way of making that work. So its relationship is absolutely fundamental as far as that goes. You've got to get the relationships right. It's far more relational than legal, almost entirely relational rather than legal. But even where replication is possible, things like, is growth the right thing? There's no point doing growth for growth's sake. And not all funding that you receive will be good funding. Yeah, there may be a lot of strings attached to it. So I think what that means to me is you're always questioning your motives if you're taking sort of the commercial model. What are my motives behind this? Are they right? To me, it's always ministry first, and money is always a secondary issue, and God will provide the resources. Now, I know that's an easy thing to say, and I know many ministries where that's difficult, but the ministry has to come first, in my opinion. And then the fourth one, just before we stop. Hopefully this makes sense. Hopefully this translates in European-wise. Live life to the full, but always be prepared for death. What do I mean by that? Well, somebody else said another phrase to me recently. He said, long-term, all earthly structures, they either go liberal or they die. And it's really the same truth looked at from a different angle, that all ministries will have a lifespan. Some, their lifespan will be longer than others, but there's always going to be a time where the earthly structure that's been created will fold. Again, if I take Christianity Explored as an example, I think I've been very aware of this, and one thing I've always been concerned with is not to set up too big an overhead and take on too many people. I've always been worried about, again, an English expression here, the tail wagging the dog. That actually what happens is you carry on existing because you've now got an organisation to sustain. It seems to me that's something that you should never really be doing in the Christian world, just keeping it going for the sake of it. So it means I've always tried to keep costs tight. I'm an accountant anyway, so you might expect that. I've always wanted my employees to have transferable skills, so that if the time comes when there's no longer use for them in the ministry, then they can move on to other things. So I've been very conscious that Christianity Explored will die at some stage. But the big danger for me, therefore, is that I may fail to take the opportunities that exist. Because after all, you're in ministry to take the opportunities that God is providing for you. and you need to walk through those doors where he's opening them most of the time. So there's always this permanent tension that you're living with, but if you ignore the fact that at some stage you need to move on, I think there's a huge risk in that, and many people often don't think, they just think of the growth and not of the problems they're storing up for themselves in the future. Know your boundaries. I said partnerships are key. I was actually talking to Peter about this a little bit this morning. So I believe that having a clear mission to what you're doing is absolutely fundamental. You must have a clear mission to what you're doing. I'll caveat that by saying that actually that vision may not all come at once, and because things do evolve. But I think we should see enough in our ministry to see what our primary role is. Okay, and it will always, move around as you move on, but you have to know what your primary role is. Again, if I take Christianity Explored as an example, our mission is that we are doing evangelism from the Bible. That's what we're doing. We're the Bible guys involved in evangelism, which means apologetics isn't my main mission. Discipleship isn't my main mission. Prison ministry isn't my main mission. But obviously there are times when you involve at low-level apologetics. We have a course called Discipleship Explored as a ministry, and we have a prison version of the course. And we have a guy who's full-time going into prisons. But they're not our primary things. They're there because they're serving the overall strategy. And I need to know that because I need to know where to start and where to sort of start thinking, well, hang on, should I finish here? I also say, and this is again a personal view, which I believe that God's kingdom tends to be a little bit more small is beautiful. I tend to think that the world of superpowers is for the commercial world and the political world. Now, again, you may disagree with me on that, but I'm just very nervous of the sort of empire building that you sometimes see in churches, because so easily it can lead to pride. For those of us who've been in the leadership tracks, we had some really good talks this morning about problems that can come from that on a personal level. So for me, it is absolutely critical to know where you fit in as a ministry, to make sure that you do what you do well, and you work with others who do what they do well. I guess that's my picture of kingdom life, really. It's a little bit, the arms, the legs, all the body working together. That's, to me, how it works. The one other thing I'd just add on this, though, is that, drawing a bit of an analogy with life, that you can have lots of people who are friends. It's great to have lots of friends. The chances are, though, you're only going to have a few close friends. And actually, hopefully, you only marry one person. Okay? So, to me, the most important partnerships you have, you need to take real care over them. Make sure, if you're getting involved in a really significant partnership, that there is real synergy and chemistry there which lasts, because you can get into problem ones. Okay, next point. Welcome spin-off projects. Now, if you're anything like me, you tend to think that your ministry is the most important ministry in the world, and how can anyone do anything which is as good or as important? Okay? But the truth is that actually, if something has merit, then it is going to inspire other related things. Again, I mentioned Christianity Explored and Alpha. We drew a lot of inspiration from Alpha, and we're very grateful to them for pointing the way. But the whole point is that when new things come along, what do? Do we see them as competition, or do we welcome them? And I would say at least I can think of 3 courses probably, which have evolved actually from people who've been in All Souls Langham Place for the last 15 years, over the last 15 years since we started as Christianity Explored. And I just think it is really important to welcome this, really important. So if people ask me for support or advice, then I would willingly want to give it. And if their venture is then successful, then I'll be very, very thankful for whatever part I've played in it. I think that's a really, really critical thing to do, because the point is we're in the Christian world. Whether something's good or bad, we'll see over time. But we are, brothers and sisters working together. And God is a creative God, always creating new things. So to me, anything new spinning off my project is good news, and I need to support that. And then one more point, perhaps before we pause again. Don't be surprised by the spiritual battle. I put this in the talk to start with, thinking, yeah, that's a really important point. And then I thought about it, and I thought, well, actually, is that any more true for a growing ministry than it is for any other church ministry you're involved in? I mean, you're naive to go into any ministry and think there's not going to be a spiritual battle there. Clearly, it's a fundamental thing. I guess it seems logical that the bigger impact you're having, perhaps the bigger the opposition may be. I haven't got necessarily scriptural justification for that, but it seems a logical thing to say. And I try to think of specifics where this may apply into growing ministries. I mean, obviously, so much of it is deception, really, isn't it? Because Satan's the deceiver, and so easily we can be deceived on things. So some of the things I've already mentioned, for example, we need to guard our motives where finances and power are involved. We need to choose our partnerships wisely. We need to guard against jealousy as far as any spin-off ventures go. A couple of other things I thought of, for instance, travel pressures. We've all been here this week, and I guess a lot of us do a fair bit of travelling. So if our ministry involves more travel, then the pressures that puts on us and the family, that's perhaps more significant. I think also team relationships as well. If you've got a spread out team, then it's perhaps that little bit more difficult. That might be good news, actually, being spread out from some of your team. But obviously, keeping good relationships between those on a wide level is maybe difficult. I guess one other thing to say in this area is that actually, it's been said in so many settings, character of your staff is so important. If somebody says you've got an incredibly gifted guy or girl, or somebody's got a really strong character, which one are you going to choose? You're going to choose character over gifting all the time, to my mind. Ideally, you want both. You do want both. But if you've got, however gifted somebody is, if they haven't got the character, this sort of area is going to show up so much more easily. Okay, how are we doing? 2 more points, and then we'll get on to, if there's any questions after that, we'll get on to that, and then I'll get you involved in the last exercise. So, final 2 points. This is I've got no sort of, this is just personal experience probably. I think that step changes often trump incremental ones. Hopefully that translates for the non-English people. A step change is just a small step. Step change is big. What am I talking about? Step change is a huge step. Incremental one is just that little bit extra. Why I say that is that the temptation is always just to take on one more person. If you've got an increased workload, take on that one more person. The only problem with that is, particularly in the charitable world, if you do that, you may have volunteers who currently were doing something, and they think, oh great, we've got somebody to do the job now. You can see it in churches just as easily as you can see it in parachurch ministries. So you might take on a new person, but others may step down. Equally, some people suddenly say, oh, this has got a new person here, we'll do this, that, and the other. And before you know it, they get swamped. So that may not, and you've got your own situation, but that may not necessarily be the right thing. If you take on 2 or more people, then you've got a chance to do something really significant. And you've also got different gifts there as well, because one person comes with one set of gifts, more than one comes with more than one set of gifts. So have a look if you need to grow. Have a look whether you need to take a step change. Again, going back to Christianity Explored, we've had 2 sort of significant growth periods. First one, we did a video, and we didn't really have anybody before that, and we had 2 people after that to promote things. When we became a charity in 2007, we actually took on 5 people at that point. When we lost the 2 who we had, or over time we lost the 2 we had. But 2 big step changes, which were very, very important for us. Obviously, you need to have the funding to make that happen. But actually, when people see that they're giving for a specific reason, they're often quite happy to give, say, okay, well, we'll give you an injection of cash here to get this up and running. 2 years' time, 3 years' time, hopefully you'll be getting the donors to support it, so I'll step out at that point. But it does give you the opportunity to move up a level. So I would say, don't take the slow route just because it's the easiest thing to do. And if you're worried about money, money often follows vision. So one caveat on that is, I would say don't jump too quickly into a new legal entity. I would always try and use the existing legal entities as long as I can do, because whenever you take on a new legal entity, you get a bit more stuck. You've already established something. You've got to have new trustees. You've got to produce accounts. All the paraphernalia that goes with a new legal entity. If you've got an existing one, that's why I would always advocate stay within a church as long as you can do. But then it will come to a point where either the church needs to get rid of you, or you need to grow out of the church. But don't jump too quickly. And then the final point that I think that, and this is it's particularly international, though you might find regional differences as well in Britain. The regional difference between Scotland and England is huge, if you didn't know that. But local ownership and expression is crucial. So, again, an example in Christianity Explored, we're now in over probably about 100 countries, really. And we've got something between 20 or 50 translations, depending upon a full translation. We've got 24 translations and almost 50 partial ones, really, in total. So, and we've learned so much in this area. As we've grown, made so many mistakes in it. One specific thing, actually, is our videos. So whenever I go anywhere new, I turn on the television, not because I want to watch the television, well, it's partly because I might want to watch the television, or you don't understand a lot of it, but it's partly because I want to see what is acceptable in a culture on television. Because if we're doing video stuff, for instance, you come here, you switch on the television here, and you've got, you hear about 1 or 2 words in an English or American accent, and then suddenly this monotone Pole comes in and sort of, talks across it. So fairly sort of low-level dubbing. Whereas I go to France, and if it's not French, they'll only take really high-quality dubbing. So Scandinavia, Holland, it may just be subtitles because their English is so good. So what is acceptable in those countries, from our perspective, from a video point of view, I need to understand that, I need to know that. If you take Africa, on the other hand, where there's no electricity, they have quite a few cell phones, but it's a very oral culture, then we don't use a video at all. But you've got some talks there, but you need to have African examples in the talks. So thankfully we've had a lot of local help in that, but there's probably over 500,000 people now who've done Christianity Explored in East Africa, which is, because it has been Africanized. But the basic principle is the same everywhere. So you make sure you keep your core principle. We're doing evangelism from the Bible, but what you need, a passionate and trusted local people to actually tweak what you've got and own it in the culture. We also talk about sort of a pull model and a push model. In the early days, we tried to push. We said, we need a translation, let's get it translated. But that was great. You got this product, but it just sat on the shelves, didn't go anywhere. So as over time, what we've learned is that you need to create the demands. If you can create the demands, the supply ends up following. Okay, whereas if you try and do the supply side, you can get yourself into all sorts of problems. But what I'm saying is these sort of things, for instance, location, where you're based, Finance, pretty obvious really. The structures you'd have put in place. How important are these things when you start off? Obviously, they're all important, you know. But if you were to try and prioritize them in an order of 1 to 8, or if you've got something in others, 1 to 9 or 10 or 11 or 12, how would you prioritize them? So it's interesting. That one has scored sort of really important. I would say, I haven't got the time to add it up. Quality looks pretty important as well, doesn't it? I'll show you what my numbers were. Which will give you a clue. I thought quality was 1. Interestingly, I put that at 2. I had this one as 3. This just shows there's no right or wrong answer, but I'll give you my reasons for this. I actually cheated. I had finance 4th equal and vision 4th equal. Flexibility and adaptability I had down as 6. And Craig, interestingly, I had that down as 7th equal. So the sphere, the one you put as 1. So sorry, say that again? Yeah, I cheated. Yeah, I found it difficult to choose between them. I think it's pretty. To me, it's interesting. Nobody put quality 1, but you all put quality pretty high. What I would say is, quality is a very nebulous term. It depends what your ministry is. But I would say, in the end, if you haven't got quality, you'll get found out. That's not to say that over time you can't grow your quality, or that actually something of poor quality can last for a while. But I would say over time, if you've got something which is poor quality, it won't last. The reason why I didn't put vision top, which most of the rest of you did, is because I think you can have some idea of what you're doing, but actually the vision can grow over time. Because if I look at my own experience, and some of the things that Peter and I were discussing during the questions, actually sometimes you stumble into that. So I would say that can grow over time. Whereas if you haven't got quality in the first place, it's quite difficult to get going. Networks is interesting. I think actually, with the exception of the 8 here, networks score pretty high. You do need to, if you haven't got any networks, it's going to be very difficult to move on that. But all these, it's not saying the other things aren't important. Finance, I think we all agreed that you can't get by without finance. But actually, there's some things you can do. Not everything costs a lot of money. You can get a long way on volunteers. If people have got a passion for something, they will do it. So you don't have to create something big financially. So hopefully that's just sort of gives you some sort of reference points.